All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into GE Vernova T&D India Ltd's Q2 results for fiscal year 2025. We've got the press release, of course, with all the numbers and stuff. Plus, we've got the investor presentation. And just to, make sure everything's on the up and up, we've also got the auditor's report. So first off, you might have noticed a bit of a name change. They've gone from GE T&D India Ltd to GE Vernova T&D India Ltd. That's because the parent company, General Electric, spun off its energy business as GE Vernova. But anyway, enough about the name. Let's get to the really exciting stuff. Their performance. I mean, we're talking about a 173% jump in orders, plus a massive boost in profitability. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the financials, could you maybe set the stage for us a bit? Like, what exactly does GE Vernova T&D India Ltd do in the Indian power scene?
Sure, yeah. So GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is a major player in India's power transmission and distribution sector. They're involved in projects across a huge range of voltages, everything from the lower levels all the way up to 765 kilovolts. And they're even taking on high-voltage direct current HVDC projects.
Whoa, hold on. HVDC projects? That sounds pretty intense. What makes those so significant?
Yeah, they are a big deal, especially now with this global energy transition happening. Basically, HVDC, high-voltage direct current, is a really efficient way to transmit electricity over super long distances. So think about those massive solar farms or offshore wind farms. To get all that power to where people actually need it, you need these HVDC transmission lines. So GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is in a great position with their expertise in this area. They're definitely going to benefit from the growing demand for renewable energy.
Wow, they're right at the center of this huge shift toward renewables. Okay, so let's look at those numbers. The press release said their revenue hit 20,661.1 million rupees. That's a 46% jump compared to this time last year. EBITDA is also looking good at 4,026 million rupees, which pushed their EBITDA margin way up from 9.4% to 19.5%. Now, how about those orders? A total of 57.1 billion rupees in just the first half of fiscal year 25. We're seeing great growth, both domestically up 88% and in exports, which are seeing a massive 460% increase. They're also talking about a big improvement in cash generation. What's the story here?
Well, these numbers really show how GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is shifting their strategy. And we talked about HVDC and the energy transition. So they're really focusing on these technology-intensive projects that are in high demand as the world moves towards cleaner energy.
So they're not just riding the wave, they're picking the right surfboard, so to speak. They're choosing projects that will set them up for success in this new energy landscape.
Exactly. And it's not just about the domestic market. Their move to increase exports and focus on private customers is pretty clever. It allows them to access higher margins and usually leads to better payment terms. It all helps strengthen their financial position.
Well, speaking of a strong financial position, their order backlog is something else. 3 times the revenue of the entire last fiscal year. What does that backlog tell us about their future?
That backlog is a strong indicator of future growth, and it's directly related to the Indian government's push for renewable energy and grid modernization. Policies like the Green Energy Corridor projects, which are aimed at creating a super-efficient transmission network for renewable energy, are a game changer.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about the whole ecosystem evolving, and they're in a great position to take advantage of that.
Precisely. And then there's the National Green Hydrogen Mission, where India is putting a lot of resources into green hydrogen. And of course, that requires specialized transmission and distribution systems. And guess who's got the expertise in HVDC technology, which is perfect for green hydrogen?
GE Vernova T&D India Ltd. It's all coming together now. They've got the expertise, the government support, and the growing demand. But it's one thing to have potential and another to actually deliver. Do they have the track record to make this happen?
Well, let's look at their history. They were the first to deliver a 765 kV insulated substation in India. They were the first to create an 800 kV HVDC transformer. And they were also the first to implement a digital substation. So they're not just keeping up, they're actually leading the way. And it's not just about being first, it's about actually getting these complex projects done right, like the 765 kV GIS project for Power Grid at Fiji. Huge project, and they did it perfectly. Or there's that massive Champa 800 kV 6,000 mW HVDC terminal, also for Power Grid. Now that's a project that shows what they're really capable of.
Okay, so they've got the vision, the tech, the experience, but what about like the actual operations? Like, are they even set up to handle this kind of growth?
Oh yeah, they've got a great foundation. 5 production facilities across India. That means they're a big part of that whole Make in India thing. And their safety record, fatality-free for the past 3 years, that's huge in this industry. Plus, they're really focused on sustainability with those green GIS substations and all that fancy electrification software.
Pretty impressive. It sounds like they're checking all the boxes: financials, technology, safety, sustainability. But the investor presentation also mentioned their clients, and wow, it's like a who's who of the Indian power sector. Everyone from Power Grid Corporation of India and NTPC to Adani and Tata. What does that tell us about their place in the market?
Well, having all those big names as clients really shows how credible they are. They can work with both the public and private sectors, which is a big deal in India's power world.
Okay, let's take a step back for a second. These numbers look great, but what do they mean for the future of the company? What challenges might they face as they keep growing?
That's a good question, and this is where things get interesting. You see, the company's doing fantastic right now, but the competition in power transmission and distribution is getting fierce. The energy transition is happening all over the world. So lots of big international players are coming to India because of its huge potential for renewable energy.
So it's like a race to the top.
Exactly. And to stay ahead, GE Vernova T&D India Ltd has to keep innovating. They need to form the right partnerships and understand how the regulations are changing all the time. They can't just relax and enjoy the good times. They got to keep pushing the boundaries.
You mentioned regulations. It seems like India's energy policies have really helped their success so far.
Absolutely. We talked about the green energy corridor projects. They're creating a really strong transmission network just for renewable energy. And then there's the revamped distribution sector scheme. That's all about making electricity distribution more efficient. These policies are creating huge opportunities for companies like GE Vernova T&D India Ltd.
Right, and don't forget about the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Green hydrogen is a big deal these days. It could really change a lot of industries.
It's a major piece of the puzzle. India is investing a lot in green hydrogen, and that means they need the infrastructure. And GE Vernova T&D India Ltd, with their HVDC know-how, they're in a great spot to capitalize on that.
So, government policies, new technology, and market demand are all working in their favor. But it's not all about government initiatives, is it? They've also made a point of working more with private companies. Why is that so important?
Well, private companies, especially those big data centers and heavy industries, they need reliable and sustainable power. GE Vernova T&D India Ltd has noticed this, and they're adjusting their offerings to meet those needs.
Smart move. Tapping into a new market with potentially higher profits. But the investor presentation also talked about their focus on being financially responsible.
They've made some big improvements in their financial health, especially when it comes to generating cash. That's because they're managing their working capital better and getting better deals with their clients.
And their debt, that's always something to keep an eye on.
They've actually gone from being in debt to having a surplus of cash. That turnaround gives them the freedom to invest in future growth and handle any economic problems that might come up. They're really building a sustainable business for the long term.
So far, it all sounds pretty good. But let's be a little critical for a minute. Are there any warning signs? Anything that could trip them up?
One potential issue is managing the risks that come with growing so quickly. These large-scale projects, especially in developing countries, can be really complicated. There could be unexpected delays or cost overruns.
So it's about finding that balance between expanding and keeping things running smoothly.
Exactly. They need to make sure their growth is sustainable. They can't sacrifice quality or profitability. They've done a good job with safety and efficiency, but keeping those standards high as they grow will be a big test.
What about the global supply chain? The energy transition is putting a lot of pressure on getting the materials and parts they need.
That's a valid point. We're seeing shortages and prices going up and down all over the place. Everything from copper and steel to things like semiconductors. GE Vernova T&D India Ltd needs to stay ahead of these supply chain problems to avoid delays and extra costs.
It's a good reminder that even with a great track record and a bright future, there are still risks.
Absolutely. The energy landscape is always changing. And to stay on top, you need to be adaptable and keep innovating. Speaking of innovation, the investor presentation talked about their focus on green GIS substations and that GridOS software.
Okay, tell me more about those. What makes them so important?
They're great examples of how they're staying ahead of the game. Green GIS substations use alternative insulating gases that are much better for the environment compared to the traditional SF6 gas. That fits perfectly with the global push for sustainability.
And what about GridOS? What is that exactly?
It's basically a bunch of software tools designed to make the power grid run better, be more efficient, and handle renewable energy sources. It's all about making the grid smarter and more responsive to all the changes happening in the energy world.
So they're not just building the hardware, they're building the brains behind a more intelligent and sustainable power grid.
Precisely. It's a complete approach. They're combining the physical stuff with cutting-edge digital solutions.
Sounds like they're trying to be the go-to company for everything related to the energy transition. But with so many things going on, could they be spreading themselves too thin?
It's a risk any company takes when it tries to grow in multiple areas at the same time. They need to be smart about what they invest in,
Yeah.
and they have to make sure they have the resources and the people to do everything well.
It's a tough balancing act. But
Yeah.
so far, they seem to be handling it pretty well. Okay, let's talk about their people for a minute. The investor presentation mentioned their commitment to safety and sustainability, but it also talked about their workforce. What's so special about their employees?
Well, they have a global workforce of over 75,000 employees, and they operate in over 100 countries. That global reach is a huge advantage in a world where energy issues go beyond borders.
And their commitment to safety, it seems like more than just words for them.
It definitely is. They've had a perfect safety record for the past 3 years. That shows how dedicated they are to creating a safe environment, especially in an industry that's known for being dangerous.
And they're also putting a lot of effort into being sustainable, not just in their products, but in how they run their business. Why is that so important these days?
Sustainability is a core part of their company culture. They're trying to reduce their own impact on the environment, promote ethical sourcing, and create a diverse and inclusive workforce. Investors today aren't just looking at profits. They want to see companies that are responsible and sustainable.
And it sounds like GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is doing all the right things. They're not just aiming for financial success. They want to make a positive difference. All right, we've talked about a lot. Their financials, their focus on the energy transition, their commitment to sustainability, and their global team. So what's your overall take on their position? Are they really set to be a leader in this new energy era?
I think they built a really strong base. Their financials are solid, their strategy aligns with global trends, and they have a great team. But just like any big goal, there are going to be risks and challenges along the way.
What are some key things investors should be asking? What should we be looking out for in the future?
The big question is, can they keep up this amazing growth in a market that's getting more and more competitive? Can they manage the risks of those big projects in developing countries? And can they navigate the global supply chain issues and get the resources they need?
It's true, what worked in the past doesn't guarantee future success, but they've definitely given themselves a good shot at being a major force in the energy transition.
And we can't forget about the bigger picture. India is leading the way in the global energy transformation, and GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is right there in the middle of it. They're not just building a business, they're shaping the future of energy in one of the world's fastest growing economies.
It's a really interesting story to follow, and we'll definitely be watching to see what happens next. But before we wrap up, let's go back to their name change for a minute. What's the significance of becoming GE Vernova T&D India Ltd?
It's more than just a new name. It's a sign of a bigger change in strategy. By aligning themselves with GE Vernova, the new energy powerhouse within General Electric, they're showing their commitment to the global energy transition. It's like they're saying, we're not just GE T&D India anymore. We're part of something much bigger, and we're ready to take on the world.
That's a bold statement. But based on what we've seen so far, they might just be able to pull it off.
And that's what makes their story so interesting. They're not just going along with the energy transition, they're actively shaping it in India and around the world.
It really does sound like they've got everything
Yeah.
lined up. They're financially strong. They've got the right technology. They're in a growing market. And they seem to be committed to doing business the right way.
And it's not just India either. Remember those export numbers we talked about? They're already making moves in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, even parts of the European Union.
So they're thinking big, globally, not just content with leading in India.
Absolutely. They see themselves as a major player in this global energy shift. And their manufacturing base in India gives them a real edge when it comes to costs and scaling up production.
That's a smart move. Use your strengths to go where the growth is. But going international always has its challenges.
No, every market is different. They've all got their own regulations, their own cultures, their own competition. To really make it globally, GE Vernova T&D India Ltd is going to have to adapt and build strong relationships in each region.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. But that's what makes it so exciting. They're not just reacting to the energy transition, they're actively shaping it in India and around the world.
Okay, let's bring it all back to our listeners. They've heard a lot of information today. What's the one big thing they should remember about GE Vernova T&D India Ltd?
I think it's this. This is a company that's at the top of its game. They're not just financially successful, they're in the perfect position to take advantage of how the world's energy landscape is changing. They're innovative, ambitious, and they want to make a positive impact. Keep an eye on this company, not just for their financial performance, but for how they're going to lead the way to a more sustainable energy future.
Well said. We started by looking at some numbers, and we ended up with a real understanding of a company that's at the heart of a global change. And that's a wrap on our electrifying deep dive into GE Vernova T&D India Ltd. We hope you enjoyed learning about this company and their amazing journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.